Okay, hi everyone. So we're going to try to finish up chapter 5 today. Okay, so last lecture we talked a lot about the anatomy of the integumentary system, aka your skin and the underlying subcutaneous layer. But let's talk more about what it actually does. And actually, we already know one of those functions already. So last lecture we did talk about vitamin D production, especially with how it relates to vitamin, or actually the effects of ultraviolet light on the skin, and also on melanin and melanocytes, and the conversion of 7-dehydrocholesterol to vitamin D3. But there are many other functions besides just vitamin D production, so we're going to go through the laundry list of these functions throughout this lecture right here. Okay, so what would happen if your skin wasn't there? So there's this cool exhibition called Body Worlds, and I think the guy who does it is actually an artist. But he found this way, he calls it plastination, of actually converting tissues and making them plastic so that you can preserve them and maintain their overall structure and appearance. And the cool thing is that we also have that technology at the medical school here as well. So, but I don't think Body Worlds, there's another off brand that came here like several years back. But the cool thing is that people donate their body to medicine or art, but they actually get preserved, and this artist kind of finds unique and interesting ways of displaying the different anatomical structures of the body in their creative ways. And this is one of them. So what this person is pretty much they degloved all the skin from this person's body, and now he's holding his former skin. And as you can see here, this is what your body would look like if your skin wasn't there. You'd be totally exposed, and muscles and cells underneath your skin, they're going to end up all dried out because of the lack of the skin. And remember that skin is kind of like having all that keratin. Also, not only holds moisture out, but also kind of helps to retain moisture as well. And not only that, remember the stratum corneum is the part that you kind of like, well, it's one, for thick, but two, it can also peel off and regenerate. If you have all of this exposed, if anything brushes up, or if this guy's skateboarding and trips, he's going to get all these muscle cells shredded off his body. Okay, so if you've ever been to a very cold environment, you know what happens to your skin and how your skin feels in a very cold environment. Well, here's a question. What color does your skin typically, or how does your skin typically change color in response to a very cold environment? Well, let's look at this person's hand right here. And what do you notice? Her fingers are different colors. And especially the middle and this pinky right here. What do we notice? Well, it's paler. And why is that? Well, things that why are they losing from their fingers? They're losing blood. So things that your blood, very important for carrying oxygen and nutrients to your cells, but it also carries heat. Now, the thing about your body in a very cold environment, do you want to lose a lot of heat to your skin and roughly 2 square meters and have it distributed all around your body, exposed to an environment? Or do you want more centralized and deeper? So this is why in a cold environment, typically you lose color from your skin. But what if you don't have good gloves, or you stay out in the environment too long? Or actually, I think there was this ongoing show called Alone or something where these hardcore survivalists, they go all the way to Alaska or the Arctic, and they try to survive for like 100 days in the Arctic. And I think so I was watching an episode and someone had to pull out due to frostbite. So your blood carries not only heat, but also carries oxygen and nutrients. So the parts of that are exposed to, like your extremities, like your fingers and toes, compared to things like your heart, your liver, your brain, not as important as those internal organs, right? If you lose a finger or a toe. So this is why your body, to preserve itself and keep your internal organs warm, it sucks away the blood away from your fingers and toes and those extremities to shunt the warm blood and hot to keep your internal body temperature normal. But by doing that, you also rob these extremities of what they need to keep alive. So this is why you see frostbite, and actually a term we call necrosis, this dead tissue, because again, it's not getting the oxygen, nutrients, or heat. It needs to keep those cells and those tissues alive. Now, why do some people flush in hot climates? The opposite end of the spectrum. And what we have here is not actually someone flushing. I tried to find a good picture of someone flushing in a hot climate, but this is actually someone who has drank before and after alcohol. So if you heard that term Asian glow, this is what happened. And actually, there's a biochemical reason behind that. We covered that in PHYL 142 when we talk about alcohol metabolism. But this is just trying to show you, okay, someone gets more red in there when they experience a hot climate. In fact, I'm one of those people who get this, and this is not due to Asian glow. I actually have rosacea, and actually rosacea pattern kind of looks like this. So two of the common triggers for rosacea are heat and light. And what happens is like, so why is heat often a trigger of redness and flushing? Well, just the opposite, right? So the thing is that, remember, your blood carries heat. But if you put it over a wider area and put it closer to the skin, now it's more, now the blood and all the heat is closer to the environment. So this heat from your blood can radiate out into the environment, thus cooling off your body temperature. So this is another reason why some people flush. It's due to the movement of blood in your skin. So this is a central concept. So blood storage is your skin does store a lot of blood, and it's not just there and just sits there stagnant. It can actually, your body can actually regulate how much blood is in your skin. So again, to review, in a very hot environment, maybe you want the blood and its heat to be closer to the environment so that the heat can radiate out into the environment and you can lose that heat. But in a very cold environment, you don't want to lose that heat to the environment, so you want to bring that blood back in. But the cool thing too is that, well, I actually had trouble finding a very good primary source for this. Like I tried to see, so your skin does store blood, and I've seen like in a veterinary or a zoological journal, like maybe 2% of your blood is in the skin, and I've seen online sites and they say anywhere from 5 to 8 to 10%. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to find actual peer-reviewed, verified stuff, but don't worry about exact numbers. Just know that your skin does store a lot of blood. Now, why is this important? Well, when someone loses a lot of blood due to bleeding, internal or external, actually the medical term for bleeding is hemorrhaging. So if someone's losing a lot of blood, well, things that your circulatory system still needs blood to keep things circulating and keep all the tissues of your body alive. So one way to, if you lose a lot of volume of blood, one way to get some of that back into your circulatory system is to take it out from the skin. So that's why when someone's has a traumatic injury and they've had a lot of bleeding, that's why they typically look very pale and ghostly, because again, all that blood is being rerouted from the skin back to their internal body. Now, what do we have here? We have sweating, right? And the physiological, or actually the medical term for sweating is perspiration. So this is what we have here, and there are actually two types of perspiration we're going to talk about. Insensible perspiration is sweat that you don't typically notice. So even if you're in a very comfortable environment, air conditioning, and you're not just like, oh, this is cool, I'm not sweating at all. Well, you are actually sweating a little bit. It's just that you're always losing a little sweat, but it's such a minute amount that you don't really notice it. But what we see in that picture is sensible perspiration, or if you're like jogging outside or walking outside in a very hot day and a bead of sweat forms, or you feel very damp just by doing some sort of outdoor activity or a good workout, that's sensible perspiration. So that's when you notice that. So that's the thing. Do you feel it, or you're unaware? You're perspiring always to some extent. It's just that it's not always sensible. Then we'll talk about excretion in glands. So eccrine sweat glands, aka Merocrine sweat glands. So again, Merocrine, that sounds like the sweat, or it actually sounds like the glands we talked about in terms of epithelia, right? The Merocrine, Apocrine, and Holocrine secretions. So eccrine sweat glands, these are pretty much found everywhere in your skin. It's not always in the same density. Some places actually have a lot more eccrine sweat glands than others. Things like your palms of your hands, they can have a lot of eccrine sweat glands. Actually, I had a student a few years back. He had hyperhidrosis, so he had excessive sweating. And during his exam paper would always end up totally wrinkled and clammy. And the thing is that though the exams were only 15 minutes, he sweated so much during those exams, it was enough to soak the paper. But yeah, so eccrine sweat glands are also watery and very salty. So the thing is about that is like, why are they salty? Or actually, you know they're salty, right? If you've ever like had sensible perspiration, a drop of sweat roll down your face and then hit your mouth, you know salt is or sweat is salty. But why is it salty? It is due to osmosis. So if you have like, so think about the epithelial cells lining your sweat glands. If they secrete sodium chloride into the gland itself, where is the water going to go if it gets really salty in the chamber of the gland? Is it going to go back into your tissues, or is it going to go into the chamber of the gland? Again, if it's very salty inside the gland, it's going to draw water towards the salt. So this is why you have osmosis, how osmosis contributes to eccrine sweat. By having very salty glandular secretions, this helps to draw out water. Now, why do you want to draw out water? Why do you want all this water on perspiration on your skin? The thing is that water absorbs heat and retains heat. So the thing is that by absorbing heat from your body, if you have water on your body, that helps to absorb all the heat from your body. And if that water evaporates, and also that heat also evaporates and radiates out into the environment. So this is why sweat is very important in maintaining your body temperature, especially when it's very hot. Now, apocrine sweat glands. Hey, that sounds like, remember Merocrine, apocrine, holocrine. So apocrine sweat glands do have those apocrine secretions. But what are these secretions? They're sticky and cloudy. So instead of that osmosis and drawing out water from the tissues via all the salt concentrations in eccrine sweat glands, remember apocrines are actually pinching off parts of the cell. So it's like not only part of the cell membranes, but all the contents of the apical parts of those cells that got pinched off and secreted into the environment. The thing is that these secretions break down into smelly compounds. So the thing is that you have also have a lot of lipids, and if you ever smelled like something like or if you've ever been very unfortunate to smell something like a grease trap, when lipids and fats break down, they can get really smelly and nasty. So things that fatty compounds, when they break down and the thing is that what catalyzes this breakdown is typically bacteria on your skin surface. And so the compounds, the secretions themselves, they don't really smell that bad by themselves, but it's when the bacteria start to break them down further, they start to smell a little more objectionable. Now, these are inactive until puberty. Everybody's body odor changes when they hit puberty. And why is that? Well, these apocrine sweat glands are inactive. So if you don't have active apocrine sweat glands, if you're pubescent, you're not going to have those smelly compounds from the apocrine secretions. And these are found in the armpits, nipples, and groin. And there's also found in other places like the eyelids or the insides of your nostrils as well. But these are the three I want you to know: armpits, nipples, and groin. Now, I love this chart, and I'm not trying to start about the sexes here, but pay attention to this part that says how men shower. And why do I like this figure? If you ignore this head and just look at the parts that says to rub thoroughly, where are those parts? Notice that they're in the axillary area, so the armpits, and also the groin. So it's like the external genitalia and actually the perineum. So that actually has a lot of apocrine sweat glands. And hey, these are the parts that become active during puberty, right? And for completion's sake, let's add in the nipples right here. So this is why I love the chart. It kind of tells you where the major areas you find apocrine sweat glands. Now let's talk about sebaceous glands. You may have heard of this before. So what are sebaceous glands? Well, these are the glands linked to these hair follicles right here. So what do these do is secrete an oily and waxy sebum. Now, ideally, these sebaceous glands should secrete just enough oils and waxes to keep your hairs lubricated and also maintain their structure as they grow. But what happens if these sebaceous glands start to become very overactive? Well, what can result is this. So what causes pimples? I did give a little hint that it's related to sebaceous glands. So your sebaceous glands are supposed to produce enough oils and waxes to keep the shaft of your hair oiled and kind of maintain the structure of your hairs. But what if they become a little overactive, or say the oils and waxes, they don't travel up to the surface and coat the cuticle of the hair? Well, the thing is that what we have here is sebaceous gland doing what it's supposed to do, producing sebum, but now it's starting to get plugged up. And as it gets plugged up here and is unable to reach the surface of the skin, then it builds up sebum, but also starts to build up things like dead cells and keratin and other waste byproducts. Now, as it builds up sebum and keratin and dead cells, it starts to grow bigger and bigger. But where is this going to end up? Well, as you accumulate all this products down here, it's going to attract, well, it's not only going to become raised, but it's also going to start causing a little inflammation. So this is why we typically see this kind of redness in the localized area when we have pimples. So again, it's just it's raised due to all the sebum, dead cells, and keratin down here, but also a little inflammation leads to the redness. But what if thing is that acne comes and goes, right? But what if the sebaceous glands remain plugged? So what do we see here? Well, if you want to see what happens, I'll tell you what can happen. So here's a sebaceous gland, and again, where acne comes and goes. But what happens if sebum continues to accumulate? It can result in something we call a sebaceous cyst. And what we have here is that, notice that with the border of the epidermis and dermis, you see that this kind of follows here. So all the sebum accumulated right here in this gland, and it actually forms a capsule right here. So this is why sometimes sebaceous cysts, you can kind of see part of it at the surface, and there's like videos of people squeezing sebaceous cysts, and maybe a little of the sebum comes out, but typically these cysts tend to, if you do it that way, it tends to fill up back again because you're only getting the tip of the iceberg. So if you want to see what these look like, just look up Dr. Sandra Lee, aka Dr. Pimple Popper, and just Google Dr. Pimple Popper sebaceous cyst. So what she typically does is she actually uses a scalpel to kind of cut this open, and she kind of pull it, and sometimes she's successful at pulling out the whole cyst, and it's actually in the fibrous capsule itself. But what she always does is not only just drains the cyst, she also has to cut the surrounding connective tissue and the gland so that it doesn't fill back up with sebum again. Because if she just squeezed out the sebum, there's a good chance that capsule could fill up right back up with sebum and that person would have a cyst. So what's the difference between acne and a sebaceous cyst? Well, acne, again, people, try to avoid squeezing it, especially if it doesn't have a head. But just kind of let it go, because I mean, it may be unsightly, but better than causing scarring. Whereas sebaceous cysts, they can last for years. It's funny because they sometimes appear, you can kind of feel them moving around below the surface. They don't always have a very obvious head like acne. You can sometimes move around the sebaceous cysts and all that, the pockets of sebum and the capsules that surround them. Now let's talk about special glands. So special glands include the mammary glands and the ceruminous glands. And this is another reason why I'm glad we're pre-recording this, because I can't show this on Twitch. So mammary glands refer, again, anatomical landmarks, mammary meaning the breast. And we do cover this more in detail in PHYL 142 when we talk about the reproductive system. But what do I want you to know for now? These are glands, they do secrete, they are modified epithelia. So they're special because you only find mammary glands, in the breast. And thing is that, do men have mammary glands? Yes, but they're nowhere near as developed as females. Again, the female body experiences a different surge of hormones that leads to the development of mammary glands and breast tissues. But in men, under normal circumstances in puberty, but there is a way for, if men experience high levels of estrogens, they can develop breast tissue and mammary gland development. But I'll leave that for PHYL 142. Then we're just talking about average normal physiology. Now, ceruminous glands, these are specialized as well. Why are they special? They're only found in the ear. So what is cerumen? Cerumen is just the medical term for earwax. So again, earwax building up over here. And the cool thing about earwax, I'll cover this in the next slide. So there's actually cerumen, or earwax, can actually have different consistencies. So wet and dry cerumen. So if you have very flaky cerumen like this example right here, you have the dry tip of earwax. So if it kind of looks like skin flakes, but if your earwax tends to be very wet and kind of like this very sticky honey like consistency, that's wet cerumen. And the cool thing about wet versus dry cerumen slash earwax is it's determined due to differences in a gene. So it's due to genetics. So people with 1 or 2 copies of the guanine at position 538 on the gene, that's kind of like if you know more about molecular biology. So just by having a certain type of this gene, and it's actually called an allele, but again, that's more, yeah, don't worry about that. So people who have a certain variation of the gene, they have wet earwax. Well, people with a different base pair in that same position on that gene have dry earwax. So it's just one letter change causes a change from wet earwax to dry earwax or vice versa. So this also affects your apocrine glands as well. So this gene is not only in terms of found active in your ceruminous glands, it's also involved in your apocrine glands. So the other cool thing is that I forgot the exact percentages, but about 80 to 90% of people with East Asian ancestry and they actually have dry earwax, whereas people with African and European ancestry, the vast majority of them have wet earwax. Or if you ever travel to an East Asian country and try to use their deodorant, you might notice that their deodorant isn't as powerful as the deodorants we have here. And again, this is another reason why. If you have more apocrine secretions and they have more oils and waxes, the thing is that it's going to cause a stronger smell and odor, right? So if you're going to a country where most people have the dry earwax and don't have apocrine secretions that have as many lipids and a population doesn't produce as much apocrine secretions, or their apocrine secretions don't have as much of those lipid compounds that break into that smelly compounds, they're going to have weaker deodorant. So this is why you should bring your own deodorant if you have the wet earwax and go travel to an East Asian country. Okay, so sensation, actually we cover this more in the nervous system for exam 3. So for now, I'm just going to go over the very basics. With sensation, well, if you're not in Hawaii, hopefully you can make it here if you're still stuck on the mainland. But give it enough time, this will happen to you when you're resting at night. Oh, what do we have there? And then you might be fully asleep, but you'll eventually feel this, and you'll be like, oh my God, what is that prickly sensation? And it's typically some sort of bug crawling on you. But that's the scary side. But the thing is that you have sensory receptors in your skin that can tell you like, hey, this is a very prickly thing walking across your skin versus your bedsheet just gliding across your skin. But that's more the creepy side. But what about this? This is Braille, right? So the cool thing about your skin, it's so sensitive, it can detect these small bumps, especially for people who are visually impaired. So if your skin wasn't so sensitive, you wouldn't be able, the people who are visually impaired or people who can read Braille wouldn't be able to do so. I mean, these bumps are really small, but your skin is so sensitive that it can actually detect the different patterns of these bumps.